boatload of fun the first time around, and we're looking forward to another set of crazy questions. I'm Michael Freert. We're in from Pope Architects, BIM manager. We're in the midst of an office move across town, and I just got back from vacation, and apparently my camera is still on vacation, so my apologies for that technical glitch there. But if you got questions, please type them in the Q&A thing. We're focusing on any question you got about Revit. We're going to try to stay within vanilla Revit, not going into add-ins. Like, we all know lots of great add-ins, but we're going to try and stay just within Revit. Why stuff works, why stuff doesn't, how to work around stuff. How do I do this crazy thing that somebody asked me to do? There are questions that may seem stupid, but they're not stupid. We want to try and answer them. We want to figure out how to get through them with you. I think across the panel, we now have over a collective century of professional Revit experience. So hopefully one of us has done it. We might remember how to do it. Start tossing some questions in the thing. We've got a couple that got emailed in advance. Let's just go around the table real quick and introduce ourselves. I'll point to Sean first because he's to my left in my view.
Nice. Yeah, Sean Zerbis. I am the Director of BIM Development at CTC Software and self-proclaimed family expert. And I'll point to my left. Actually, that looks like it's pointing to my right in my case. My left is Danya. Danya.
Hey, Danya Tabor Hansen. I am with Trimark USA. We are kitchen design, food service industry consultants, and we do design work as well as also equipment and everything. And I've been doing Revit for a long time. I am good at Revit families and Revit forensics. And I will pass it to Bob.
Bob Akbar. I am the BIM manager, one of the BIM managers at RDG Planning and Design. I guess I call it, say I'm a jack of all trades. I know a lot about everything in Revit, but not a lot really deep. So, because it's just kind of the nature of my job. So I think it's going to be Vicky next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vicki Harris. I'm with HKS. I am the firm-wide BIM leader here out of the Dallas office. My job is to develop and write all of the standards associated to how we deliver projects using BIM. I've been using Revit ever since I graduated with my undergraduate degree, knew nothing about it and learned everything about it on the job. So don't know as much as probably Danya does about families or about Sean does in terms of development, but I know enough to be able to write and develop our standards at HKS. So, and then I will pass it on to John.
Great. I'm John Atkinson. I'm the National Engineering BIM Manager for DLR Group. I support 7 distinct engineering disciplines. So if you got a question, bring it.
So we start off with the preloaded questions and fling this one at you, John, because I think you've got probably the closest chance of having it. Danya suggested filters, but why are you unable to override graphics of structural columns in a view by category, i.e. changing weight of the projection lines? It works if you do it by element, but won't do it if you do it by category. No error message pops up. There's simply no graphical change once you complete the request. And I think Sean had some things, and I ran into something similar last week, but John, if you want to take that one.
I personally haven't come across that issue, and nobody's asked me yet. So, Sean.
Yeah, so there's 2 reasons I can think of why this might be an issue, and I ran some testing on this myself just before today's discussion to see if I could reproduce it, and I couldn't unless I did one of 2 things. And Danya had the first one that I tried, which was a filter was applied to my view somehow. Could be a filter for all structural objects or things that match certain names, whatever, but that filter was overriding whatever my element graphics were if I applied that. And the other one that I ran into was the object itself, the structural column, in its definition was using a subcategory instead of using the primary category. And so the primary category override wasn't affecting it because the subcategory was controlling it. It's one of those 2 that I found that I could reproduce that kind of experience. My suspicion, though, is that since you're able to override it directly, it's probably going to be something like a filter or a work set override that's doing it in the element visibility graphics of the view, and it's overriding the category control.
So what I ran into 2 weeks ago, and I hope this is not your problem, is we had a user who went through and did line type overrides on all of the architectural columns in the entire project.
Yes.
So I got to go through and manually not only do the object, but then the individual lines within the object to reset all of those. So it could be something as beautifully elegant as that. And by beautifully elegant, I'm using that as a euphemism. Moving that into the next question, when we create our building section, we make all of the 2D graphic elements a group and then copy and paste the group to the enlarged detail views for that section so that if a change is made, it's reflected in both detail and overall building sections. Problem is that the detail group only performs correctly in the first enlarged view we placed it in. If we want to adjust in the view window, etc., this becomes a pain as there are any dimensions associated with the detail graphics, they get deleted and have to be added again. Would love to know why this occurs and how to fix it. And they sent a great graphic example of that. My first answer is you don't. I've run into this a bunch, and I had a user saying like, hey, why can't I see all my columns? There's just these little black lumps. And they had a great detail of all of the column wrap that was just so many lines that it just turned into a black blob. Show everything once, show it clearly where it needs to be, and represent a coarser level at other views. You can do it, but it creates confusion. And even with detail groups, if you use a family, it's better, but you may still get, as an object moves, when you delete it, that dimension is going to an object that's no longer there. It'll break. So that's a practice thing. That's an old school. You only want to draw it once by hand because you're going to have to redraw it again, and it's still best practices, I think, to only draw it once. Bob, you jumped in on when to queue up on that one too.
Yeah, Sean and I were talking about this too before. We actually do it here in the office instead of doing groups or stuff like that. We actually do detail components as well if we need to see it. So you can make a component, a detail object with the stuff in it. Again, we try to only say it once because you can get big blobs of stuff you can't see. But if I'm going to do something over and over again, I will go to a detail component instead of a group, because actually groups can become very dangerous in Revit and cause other issues you don't want to deal with.
Yep. I want to add one other thing. The one reason why I have done this in the past was because I want to manage all of the related enlarged details from one section cut view. To do this, you have to have a master section cut view that's at the proper scale. So this can be a little tricky, but I will often do dependent, duplicate as dependent, and then intentionally place a call out that looks at that dependent view. And then the text is exactly the same. There's no need to ding around with groups between the two, but that doesn't facilitate the concept of having, a detail enlarged here at 1/2 inch and then a detail enlarged over here at 1.5 inch. You have to have a single scaled master view that, you do all those dependent views from. But it's one that I've done just because I like seeing all of my controls, text, everything from one master view, and then actually show it from the enlarged view.
You can get some of that behavior in by embedding detail elements within other things. So if you embed a top cap detail, drafting detail in a wall, or in a sweep, you can get some of that to work. But don't over detail in the big views. If you're showing it in detail, run with that.
I think the issue that this particular user was calling out was the text and dimension issues, that those items, those leaders, those things like that get removed.
That's a secondary question that's coming up.
Oh, my bad.
Is there a way to create a dimension style like that shown? We always have to do this with detail items. It's a pain because the times they don't. I did not copy the image on this. Does anybody have the email up that had that in it? I'll look for that when we'll come back to it. Why can't you click on and change the position of a text or add a dimension in a view that is split? This is the one, Sean, that you were talking about, like you can with any other views, a wall section that is split. When the split happens, you get some text shifting there. Is there any way to fix this? I had flagged Donnie and Bob on that one, unless anybody else wants to jump in.
I've just done the old fashioned way. I just moved the text and, and tried to plan ahead before I split it, because
Yes.
it does it at a time and it's just a pain in the butt. And it's not just text. You can do it with keynotes. It does it too. I mean, or tags. It's a deal. It comes down to it. I don't know how not to make it do it. So I just plan ahead, and try
Yeah.
not to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, we collaborate on that. And if I know I'm going to split it, I grab the text and I move it to where I want the text to show up. And then I do my division of my view and bring the other side in closer. You plan ahead for that, and it eliminates that problem.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Revit doesn't allow you not to plan ahead.
Well, then you put it back together, then you do it, and then you break it apart again. Rinse and repeat.
In Revit 20 and below Revit 21, a host model cannot control how the other links line weights are governed, like a host placing a wall and a link showing a wall. Other than using filters based off of work sets, I don't know of a good workaround. Vicky, you look like you're thinking. You want to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever run into this issue. If you're linking in a model into your parent model and you want to change the line weights of their objects, you should be able to do that through visibility graphics and then Revit links override. I do know that there's a few things that are limited, but it goes back to some of the things that Sean and Danya mentioned earlier about, if you're changing the overall category, but there's subcategories that some elements are, drawn with, then you have to override those categories as well. So honestly, I haven't run into this issue before. Again, if you have a filter that's in there and that's overriding something, then you might go in there to visibility graphics and think you're trying to override it, and it's not allowing it because you have a filter set somewhere. So yeah, I don't think that has changed. I've been able to do that for many years before 2021. So I'm not sure what that is going on there.
Yeah, I was trying to think of that as myself. I'm trying to figure out how I was trying to replicate that in my head, because I've never experienced that. I mean, I've always just gone in and overrode it through the graphics of the view and been done with it. It just worked. But it'd be interesting to see in live and figure out what it is and maybe play with it and see why it's happening. There's got to be, it's always got it with Revit visibilities and stuff. There's always got to be something there that we don't know about that's causing it.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing. I think even on the earlier one, it's typically not the normal behavior, but if you're experiencing it, we're not saying that it's just crazy. It's just there's something in there that we have to dig into to figure out what is really causing it. I've had that issue. I think the CTC tool that you guys created, most common thing is there's an element there and you can't find it. Yale's Invisibility Advisor helps finding that. But there's still a different ghost in models. You just have no idea what's been done until you can get your hands into it. So
yeah, it could be something like the sub link model, like you got the actual link and then the sub link is set differently. I don't remember going back a long time not being able to fight with that.
I think maybe one of the things that might be meaningful for this user perhaps is showing the current default way that we all do it. There have been plenty of times when I've run into customers of mine where they didn't know that this particular control was available and they're trying to change the line weights from the main object styles, and it's not changing the link differently than what their main objects are, and it was kind of frustrating. Is it okay if I share my screen real quick?
Yeah.
All right, so let me share this real quick here, and just kind of go through where that control is, so this end user can maybe see what that looks like. So I'm in a floor plan. It has a linked model in it. Actually, has a number of linked models in it, and I've currently turned on, in my case, temporary view properties, so I don't screw with my view templates that I have set. But if I go to visibility graphics, when you do have links, there's a Revit links option here. And you can see I've got some off-on controls already set on some of my links, but I also have display settings that you can sub-control here. One of them, my structural model, actually has a custom setting on it. And in the custom setting, when you choose that, either by the host view, by the link view, or by custom, you get different access here with the model categories and annotation categories, where if you do say custom, you can actually explicitly change the line weights of that link's elements in this view. Now, you can't do it globally, but you can do it for this view, and you could potentially make yourself a view template and be able to apply view template properties of your link configuration across multiple views. It's not the most ideal way to do it in all cases, but it does exist as a possibility, and you do have the controls, even if it's not the most convenient across hundreds of views.
One thing,
Marshall.
Sean, if you could bring that back up, I think
Yeah.
going back to the structural columns and even this, one thing that I have noticed with, this was a couple of years ago, I think people have gotten better educated, but if you go back to the Revit links section, so there is a plus sign there. And when you pop that open, it also gives you the instance. I've come across a handful of projects where for some reason, somebody chose to override the instance, and then somebody else is coming in and trying to change it up there at the top, and it's not applying. And it's because it's not technically a filter, but somebody's gone in and overridden that instance, because when you have a linked model, you can copy it around. We don't advise you do that. But if you had copied it around, you would see a 3 and a 4 and a 5, and you can override each individual instance. You obviously do not want to do that, but that could be the case in both of these examples, that somebody has done that, and then when you're trying to overwrite it through the normal location that Sean just showed you, it's not applying because, again, it's been manually overridden somewhere else.
Yeah,
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. All right. So, how to write a formula for number type that footmark feet formula if common path length rounded 0. I'm not entirely sure what.
I'd be curious what the common path condition is. If is it if common path equals more than 200, whatever. But yeah, you could definitely use round up, and then the path length divided by 1.
Mm-hmm.
You get a numeric value.
Yeah, divide by 1 and times 1 is the common deunitize and reunitize something that you can use in formulas quite frequently. I do that all the time when there's mixed units or inconsistent units or whatever. You can do that. The thing that's tricky is taking a number, which you can do, and converting it into some other unit of measure. Be careful when there's mixed units on a project, though, because Revit doesn't inherently know that a number means feet or meters. So you have to know which unit of measure you're playing with.
Yeah, and we're in feet and inches because the kitchen works in inches. The food service industry is in inches, which racked my head when I moved over to it. But yeah, we have to watch even our catalogs. We have to watch how they're set, so that we don't get a table coming in that's 36 feet long or something. So you have to watch your units with those.
So I pulled up the email while we were chatting, and the dimension that someone was asking about, is there a way to create a dimension style with no text? We just want a dimension detail the point with a note. Is the open-ended dimension. So it's like if you've got a X clear to something off of a break line with the double arrow at the end, or whatever your arrow is pointing that way.
I've got that open if you want me to share.
Yeah, Donnie, if you want to.
Okay, where's my share screen? And yeah, and that to me, that's a family. That's a detail family. I don't know what everybody else said. So Michael, go ahead. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. So to me, that looks like a detail family because you could make it where you could pull it. You could get your 2 different things on the side. You could have 2 different labels that you could just fill in as you wanted. Anybody else got any other ideas?
Nope, that's exactly how we handle it. Because with a dimension string, it has to dimension something. You could create a style where the one side had that double arrows, but again, that dimension string would have to go to wherever that 12-foot opening is. So in your case, where you've cut off the detail and that 12-foot doesn't really exist there, the only way around that is to create a detail component family. And there's a number of things that unfortunately, in Revit you have to do that. We have detail component
And
family for the
Is it a
section
detail
cut mark.
component or annotative component?
Annotative component.
Annotative. I
yeah.
just caught that myself. It is an annotative family that you want to use, not a detail, because that way you can get your label in there.
Yep.
I
Sorry.
would like to add to that a little bit. I would use a combination of both detail and annotative. I would put the annotation symbols inside my detail,
Yes.
because if you make them both
Mhm.
annotative or the whole thing annotative, then as your view scale changes,
Yes.
the length reference changes. So you want to have the line graphics be a line-based detail item, and then
Right.
embed into that a couple of nested annotation symbols for the double arrows or the single tick and the text top and bottom.
Yep. Great point.
So we've only got 3 more questions queued up. So if you've got more questions, stick them in the chat here. What is the best way to group structural members with structural connections? Revit doesn't allow grouping of members with connections to be grouped.
Sadly, I think that is your answer, because Revit doesn't facilitate that in any fashion or form. There's a lot of things groups don't properly do. MEP has tons of troubles with groups, with circuits and systems. Grouping and ungrouping often breaks those things, and in the case of structural with connections, again, there's just limitations that groups tend to not play friendly with. It's a terrible answer, but it's the honest answer that I can give.
Anybody want to tell me how I quit sharing?
Top middle of your screen, there should be a stop share button on the little tag flyout thing. I believe.
John, you're our resident MEP and engineering guy. Do you have any further good news to Sean's bad news?
No, there's really no good way to do groups in structural.
Have you found any workflows that are not horrible for that?
No, there's it is what it is. I mean, unfortunately.
Well, I will just say also to add to that, I mean, it was mentioned earlier, but group functionality just overall throughout the whole suite of tools is just not that great. Even on the architecture side, we are constantly telling our teams, please don't use groups, just because in theory, it sounds like a great concept, but it just has been so underdeveloped, unfortunately. Again, Autodesk gods, if you're listening, it's just one of those things that it does not function the way it should, and creates inherent relationships that you don't want it to create, doesn't create the relationships you do want it to create. So yeah, I just would say that be happy that you can't group it, because it probably would cause other issues if you could.
Plus model instability.
Oh
so,
gosh, yeah.
So I'm jumping
size.
Jumping ahead. We've got a question. What are some of the unintended consequences of using model groups?
Everything.
So I could say, well, should we just go around the room?
Yes.
We've had models crash violently. We've had groups disassociate. So you have 50 instances of a group that become instance 1 through 50, simply because a user ignored an error and clicked through. We've had groups crash because they had hosted elements inside of them, or they had walls that wanted to connect to things outside of their group. You can make groups work. There are a lot of folks who really advocate for them, but they are very, very careful and very thoughtful with how they run their groups. Anything that goes into a group has to be clean. It has to be only connected to stuff in the group. It can't have any associations outside of that group. Like it's crash city. Like error propagation like mad. Like I've literally fixed one error and watched 30 other errors disappear out of our warnings count. Who's next on
Let me. I've had I hate to say it. I've had success with groups recently on one thing where we were taking, and because none of our components that we were working with were hosted, and I was able to take the component groups and the tags from their main view and group them. And then I was able to take the other elements in other views, such as their utilities and their tags, and host and group them. And what we were doing was building it so we could take it, put it somewhere else. And they're required, and first thing they do, place the group, align the group, and then ungroup.
Yep.
Because the worst thing is having it still stay the group and the file size, etc. But also we may be able to manipulate tags and things like that came with it. But yeah, grouping is great if you can get something out and make it its own family or own project. But I will tell you one instance that grouping is absolutely amazing. If you're in a family and you realize, man, this part right here would be really nice to have it itself, you can group it and you can save it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got it as a subcomponent that you can use in other families and stuff. So that's what it's really, yeah, if you group something to take something out, beautiful. When you group something back in, ungroup. Next.
Yep.
Now the side part of it though is like, Michael, you and I have this conversation. Sometimes you need to group groups because like we do large senior living facilities here, and we had one client we were working with that had 42 different unit types. And so they made, instead of using groups, they had 42 individual models coming into the floor plan. And I can tell you, the structural and MEP were very, very irritated with us. We would be constantly, we were the interiors on it. So we would be actually trying to work within some of the MEPs. I found out from MEP that they would bring it in and then attach and explode every model as part of the deal to make it basically binding it, as I know AutoCAD, just to make one floor plan that had everything in it. And then we'd do that and we'd find a group inside of a group, which is what groups become bad, that had a cadenza that was 50 feet out in space somewhere. You had to go get the crazy thing. So there are times that I will tell people to use groups, but we have a long discussion about it because linking in 42 models into a project is a large pain in the butt later on.
So to your scenario, one thing that we have been pushing forward at HKS, and one of my colleagues, Cindy Wood, is taught this at, I believe, conferences as well, is this idea of super families. So for units, everything that goes into the unit that is not a system family or a door is built into a family with shared components. So each individual family is shared and then brought into a parent family, and then you load that family into the project. That has been working pretty well for our teams. And the thing is you can make it parametric. So when you have, 10 units, and then that one unit is going to be just a hair longer at the end, but it's still the same unit type. Well, guess what? It's parametric. So you can just change that dimension and everything works. In terms of groups, so when I first started working in Revit and on a project, I was doing the documentation for our ceilings. And I was like, this is perfect. We had like a star-shaped hospital tower, and I modeled the ceiling over here. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to rotate it and copy it over, and we're good. And lo and behold, after I copied it and I printed the stuff, everybody's like, why are these ceilings all incorrect? And I was like, I don't get it. It's right in my main group. Well, that's where I learned that they will make inherent connections to things. And when I was rotating that ceiling or copying it and rotating it, it was trying to find a wall to attach to, even though the ceilings were drawn as sketches. So that is what you face with groups is, like we all know, Revit still tries to make inherent connections between system families. And when you start to group them and copy them and move them around, it's still trying to find a connection that it can do. And that's where you start to face all the crashes that Michael mentioned, and it starts to disassociate itself, especially on the day that you're going to print for your main issue. All of your groups are broken and you have 500 warnings that you have no time to go fix, and it's just a big problem. But I think what Dania said, we have used that quite a bit, group it, save it out, do what you need to with it, bring it back in, place it, and then ungroup it again. So again, strategically, I think using them is good, but relying on them for documentation purposes, et cetera, is really problematic.
I'd like to add one thing to that, if I may. just from the nightmares of model groups specifically. Well, actually, any kind of group for that matter is from a BIM management point of view, they can actually halt you from being able to reload content into your model as well, because and depending on how deep you go with groups, and some people have gone very deep where they have like model groups in the main, model, they have model groups and design options, and then you try to like reload a family and it just throws up all over the place and or causes crashing. Yeah, I will third the Danya and Vicky tack there of use them temporarily and then ungroup them. Don't rely on them, because if you leave them in the model, you're gonna have pain over time.
Right, especially if they're in a design option.
Oh yes.
Especially. But yeah, we've used plumbing groups with good success. But
Yeah.
Right, it's quickly get them placed and then ungroup them.
Yep. And
I will say, go on,
ahead.
Sean. I will say, grouping of families that are unhosted, that is a really good place, because they're A, families, and if they're unhosted, they are not trying to make an association. It's when you start grouping system families and families that have host components, so they are trying to find who they belong to, and when you create that group, it just has an issue. Also, a lot of people may not know this, but groups also have an origin point. So when you create it, if you don't turn it on, and if you don't try to figure out where that origin point is, that can also cause problems when you start to move it and rotate it.
Oh yeah, and mirror it. Don't mirror groups, by the way, but if you do, just don't.
Yeah, don't.
We have rules in our area. We don't mirror, because you can't mirror kitchen equipment. They may not make that oven with the door on the other side and stuff, but yeah, mirroring is bad.
Yep. Yep.
It's evil.
To piggyback a little bit on John's phrase, and to go back to the statement that I made earlier about, model groups don't work for MEP. They don't work long-term for MEP, but again, just like Danya and Vicky were saying, and what John said, you can group items in MEP, you can place them and then immediately ungroup and begin to leverage those objects, and it saves you a ton of time in layout, but we're not leaving them grouped in the model in production, because that's just not stable.
Place it, ungroup it.
Yep.
And
do not leave groups. Michael.
We did lose Michael. Yep.
Do not leave groups in family. If you group something in family, do not leave a group in a family.
Unless you are using it as an array. That is the only place.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Well, see, I think my rule is always arrays have to be something nested. So I'll make it its own. True.
I think you don't want to group and array explicit items, collections of items that are supposed to retain parametric properties. You're supposed to be doing that as a nested family and arraying the entire one item that already has its parametric controls. But yes, that's the only time groups are really acceptable in a family, if you're going to have any level of stability.
Yeah. I was elated the time I figured out I could get this stuff out and use it somewhere else by grouping it and saving it out and then ungrouping a group. Man, mind blown. There's a new blog post. I got to do that.
Yeah.
And I think
I believe, yep, we might have Michael back. I did see a question that was posted by our moderator that came in from the YouTube side. There was a question about Revit being, and I'm going to air quote this, fully 4K compatible, because there are some issues that sometimes creep up, like when you right click and the right click menu doesn't show up where you expect it to. Having had quite a bit of experience in the 4K world, I want to say that Revit is absolutely not 100% 4K compatible. It can work really well in 4K, but I'm going to give you the one piece of criteria that I've found that makes it consistently work in 4K, but you're going to hate the answer. You cannot scale your main view, right? If you're going to use 4K, you have to use 4K at 100%. If you start blowing it up to 200% so you can view it, don't use 4K. Use the 1980 by 1040 or whatever that resolution is. That is the scale that you can see. You're not gaining the benefits of 4K if you scale it up. So, when you want the 4K, like actual benefits, like you want to watch a movie on your laptop at 4K, then change it to 4K, watch your movie, and then turn it back to what you're going to use for production. Because otherwise, if you're just enlarging it, what's the point? It's more pixels showing the same thing that your normal monitor would show, at least as it relates to Revit.
Piggybacking on that, it's only been what, 3 releases now that Revit has officially supported dual screens.
Yeah.
I think it was either 2019 or 2020 that was the first year that Revit, like, it's worked on dual screens for a long time, but there's been weird twitchy stuff. There's still weird twitchy stuff. I had in Revit 2021 a couple months ago having to do the minimize, reminimize, unminimize, switch back and forth. And if you have Windows on a laptop that is zoomed, like if your Windows scale setting isn't 100%, that causes all sorts of crazy stuff.
Oh yeah.
So I'd be very surprised if it is fully 4K capable, or it will be soon. I'm not seeing that coming down the pipe.
As a developer, I will say, working with 4K when zoom percentages are at play is an absolute nightmare. You can pretty much expect most apps in the market to have a problem when there's zoom percentages. They all support 4K monitors if your resolution is reasonable and you're not zooming. They all support 4K if your resolution and is whatever 4K is and you're at 100%. But as soon as you change that zoom percentage, you are asking for a world of hurt in many apps, Revit included, AutoCAD included, everybody's apps included.
So we, Bob, go ahead.
Michael, there's a question in the QA, a follow-up to that first one.
Yep, that's what I was going to jump to.
All right.
But did we skip the secondary common path of travel schedule clear up? The issue is the person wanted to see the foot symbol added to the results of the formula. So the only way I can think would be to go back to Sean's earlier comment, add the multiply by 1 foot. And
yeah, but that won't work. That won't work if,
That's
okay, so yes, you can do that if you're labeling it with some kind of a fake label and you're intentionally putting a suffix character of the apostrophe. But if you're using a number, it's not going to do it in Revit natively. You have to do some other janky workaround for it. What I would do is I would take the number value that you want them to enter, and then I would put a secondary parameter, which is the displayed value, which is feet and inches or feet, whatever, and then have it be number times or divided by 1 or whatever that is, and have it so it shows the foot mark there. But you're going to get -0 inches unless your units of measure are updated. Or make yourself a tag. You can tag the object if it's a taggable object. And then that tag, you can actually reformat the text in the tag, number included, to show the suffix, or to show feet and inches with just feet with no inches, or whatever you want. There's a couple ways you could do that.
Donna, you're really good with jumping in and out of crazy data structures. Like, it seems like you and I have talked about using like your XYZ share parameters to do some, I'm going to say, units falsification.
I call it hijacking. Yes, I call it hijacking because we created a set of parameters that cover the basis of the type of parameters that you can use. And if you look in there and you say, I want to create a parameter, you've got like a number, an integer, text, just about anything that you want. And we have hijacked our voltage to be text value. And you do that with, I did it with a formula, so that if the formula says it's 208 and we have a checkbox to say 120/208, then the checkbox makes the text go in as 120/208. You can't do 120/208 in voltage, but I did when I changed the schedule to show me a text parameter. We always set the voltage to the highest, and then we have a checkbox that will say whether or not, and then it's going to be in that formula. That's a really long formula too.
Yeah, you can get some really messy stuff, and I will say, don't go past like, say, 16 nested logic functions and formulas.
Nah, keep going.
Oh no, you can keep going, but I will say, if you are getting that deep, in a lot of cases, it might be better to start investigating the concept of lookup tables, because that can save you a lot of formula length.
Yeah. Well, when you have to open the dialog box and you have to extend it to the next page for the formula to be in there, you think it's too long? Okay.
No.
That's when I just copy it and put into Notepad.
Yeah, I do it in Notepad.
Yeah, Notepad plus all day, because you get the parentheses coloring.
Yep.
Yep.
I've never
So,
used that.
To aid my earlier question, there's a web link, object line style weight thicknesses between. I'll have to pull this up in a window. Transferring project standards isn't always available because of access, or we'd have to remodify our object styles. Let me see if I can pull up.
Yeah, so I looked at this, Michael, while we were going through. And so essentially that question earlier where the line weights and we were explaining how you could override it. The problem is the line weight settings for the linked model are not the same line weight settings for the parent model. And therefore, and when you try to override, it's still not going to look. And unfortunately, I don't know of a way to override the actual line weight settings in a model without getting into the model and truly changing them to match yours. So
Hey, Autodesk gods.
Right. That's a fun. The actual line weight themselves, not like line styles or object display styles, but like line weight 1, line weight 2.
yeah.
And I don't think I would ever transfer project standards, somebody else's line weights.
Oh,
That would just blow up my entire model.
I may transmit my styles into their model,
Yeah.
but then you have to do that every time you receive their model because it's not going to persist when you get updates.
So when I've had to do that, what I've done has been transfer it once when we set up the link, and then ignore it until we get to, like, say, the 95% CD printing, and then retransfer. So we suffer through the weird colors and the weird display for production, and then at printing do that, and then we just flag that, like, hey, you're gonna have to redo this when we get updates.
Or there's
Caveat to
one
that.
where you sit down with the BIM manager on the other team and say, can we find a consensus that works for you and us so that we can just set the model up that way in the beginning.
By the by, now that we're all working in BIM 360 or heavily, don't do the transfer of your line weights into their model if you're up on BIM 360, because that's just mean and irresponsible.
Yeah, that is definitely one that, if you know that their line weight settings are different than yours, and there's a reason that they are set the way, but you need it a different way, that merits a conversation.
Yeah, you need to have a conversation with the other people and figure it out together.
Yeah.
or you won't be invited back to the party.
Or they won't be invited back to the party.
But it really is a, like, how we can all collaborate well together. And did you get the checkbox in your kindergarten report card of, runs at others with scissors, or did you get the checkbox plays well with others? And it's not uncommon, at least from our side, to not have necessarily access to the BIM manager for the other team. When we deal with smaller engineering firms on occasion, or design build engineering, like plumbing happening, they may have a drafter who's doing their modeling. They may not have the background to fix those standards. So just talking to them and be like, hey, what are you guys doing? How do we fix this?
Yeah.
Is huge. We have a follow-up to the other YouTube question on 4K capable. How about 256 by 1440?
Go for it. Just don't scale your views. It's the scaling that really screws with things.
It is. If right click on your Windows desktop and check the display settings zoom. If that does not say 100%, Revit will hate you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other thing is too on that is you also Bluebeam does it too. I mean, I get at least once a week hey, I printed this out, my Bluebeam looks terrible. It's because their scale factor's off, and it printed it, blew the thing out of the deal because Bluebeam can't handle it. So
Well, and that's a common issue we've had with people who do have their monitors scaled up, and then they're trying to print from Revit, and everything in the model looks fine, and then they print it and all the text is jumbled, and their teammate prints the same sheet and everything's fine. I'm like, yeah, your scaling is off. You need to be at 100%. And sometimes in that display setting, this is a problem we've faced, is when you run an update, sometimes it'll be set to 100%, but it will say you have to click this sign out button for it to reapply that 100%. Which, you know, people find that really weird because they're like, I've shut down my computer 5 times. And I'm like, yeah, unfortunately, you have to click that sign out button that's right there in the red text for it to really do what it's supposed to. I don't know why. It was something with an update.
And if you unplug and replug secondary monitors on a laptop, Windows will very helpfully change that for you on a regular basis. And you won't notice it because you're used to seeing it at that. Yeah. I've had a couple of users who had that problem, and it's been some intermittent docs. Some docs have been absolutely great on it, and docs that we've had that would later go on to fail have caused that problem too. So I have no clue what's going on with it, but check that scale. Like if I've got a weird graphical problem, that's the first thing I check with my users. And if you're on remote desktop, turn your colors down to 16-bit. You wouldn't think that one is a big deal. But 16-bit color seems to fix a majority of the remote desktop graphical issues.
Yeah, please don't try to do 4K on remote desktops. Like, just say no.
Not even. We are out of questions from today. So if anybody's got some new ones.
We still have some from the previous session.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's what I was gonna flip over to.
Yeah.
So this is a beautiful one. We occasionally have floating parts out in outer space, 29,000 miles away in one recent instance. Huge issue in BIM 360. Any ideas how that happened so we can guide users? When you ask the user who caused the issue, they're completely unaware of how it happened. I'm not sure I could do that even if you ask me, unless you give me an AutoCAD command style line in Revit. Groups. It happens, well, A, because of groups, B, because somebody imported something from CAD. And when you import something from CAD, it'll pull in the origins. Everything in Revit has its own origin. If that origin gets reset somewhere funky, or it gets set way off, it'll nudge it the other direction.
Yeah, Revit has a limitation of a 25-mile radius from origin. If anything gets outside of that, it will start to move things around. And you will get some real big oddities like that. Also, mirroring of hosted objects, space-based objects can do some really squirrely things, where I've seen lighting fixtures that were right in the middle of a room and then they mirrored it in place for whatever reason, but it flew off in space and they couldn't find it, and it ended up being like 80 miles away, and it screwed up everything else in the model and threw all kinds of warnings for the rest of that model's life cycle until we found that object. So, you know, mirroring is bad.
I discovered that a long time ago in like Revit like 6 or 8, because as a CAD drafter originally, I would just, if I wanted to array something, mirroring could be a really quick way to do it, depending on how it was built. And from hand drafting, that works great. In AutoCAD, that works great. In Revit, bad things happen. Like it just, yeah.
I mean, I remember when hosted elements, when they lost their host, would fly off into space, but it wasn't that far.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That was usually like 20 feet or 100 feet.
The other way it can happen is someone brings in a CAD file and explodes it. You know, we slap their hands for that one, but and then all of a sudden you got some line that's 29,000 miles out there, some little tick mark that you gotta go find too. I've had that happen.
We've got another live question, so I'm going to move that one ahead of the queue. Sorry, I had a second question that sounds similar to the first, but was different. It's about a host model controlling common line styles like demolished. I don't quite understand. Justin, can you unmute? Tim, would you be willing to explain that speak to us? Justin, can you unmute Tim? I don't know, maybe. Oh, here we go. Normally with object styles or line styles between a host and a, he's not available to live chat. Normally with object styles or line styles between a host and a link, the host can typically control the styles by adding it to the host style managers. However, if a host or link use a different line pattern for demolish, they show how they're set in the individual models. I've had a support call for this before. So I'm not sure that I've seen that, but I have had recent similar models doing strange things. I would have to think about that one a little bit. What they're talking about is if the phase specific line overrides to change, like say a demolished to a dashed versus a hidden line style, or a double dash or red or whatever you want, is notably different in the nested link. It can mess around with that. I've not seen that. Has anybody else seen that?
I have seen that quite a lot. And there is absolutely nothing you can do about it because this user is correct. The linked model controls its phase override graphics in very much the same way that those line styles were, but you have no sub control of that in any form or fashion from the host model. You can't do anything about it because there's no controls.
But doesn't phase mapping clean that up?
Phase mapping creates a
because you're applying the host style overrides for that.
It doesn't really override that. It creates a mapping so that you know that name X means new construction in your model, but it doesn't change what the model's override for the line styles and patterns are. It just says this phase means this phase. It doesn't actually do the graphic controls, which has been a limitation of Revit for quite a long time. But my general recommendation to companies has been, well, first of all, don't change them unless you absolutely have to. But if you do, you got to communicate that with other teams because whatever you change is what other links are going to see from your model. 100%, no controls. That's another one of those Autodesk God's questions.
I do think the solution to that, though, is, again, this is one where if you're having such a drastic difference between your standards and whoever you're working with standards, there are ways around it. So if they can set up a linked view where they have filters in there set up to show your standard so that when you link it in, it looks like yours and vice versa. That's a place where by linked view linking is very, very advantageous.
That does work for most object styles and line weights and things like that, but that sadly still does not work for the phase specific overrides because it's in its own little nested area, and there isn't any way to
override those.
To override that. That's the problem, is there is not an override control for it.
Let's get that in the wish list.
Yep.
Autodesk on.
So we've got 5 minutes left. I've got a couple of questions from the previous session left. Sean, I know you got to hop off for another webinar in a couple of minutes here. Let's see, what are your favorite management type schedules to include in your template? Dania, I want to hear you on this because you do a bunch of awesome stuff with this.
Oh, thanks. I think that one thing that you need to do is have a working schedule that equals out your print schedule. Because if you're going to be filtering in things to your print schedule, you need to have a working schedule to verify that those things are set the way they're supposed to be. So you need to have one that has those things turned on where you may turn them off in your print schedule. Another one would be get you a schedule for your views that shows where the view is, whether the view is on a sheet or not. And then you can eliminate some of your file sizes by just eliminating some of these extraneous views that are going all over the place. Everybody's section views all over the place, for example. Also get one for your, let's see, I covered the views. I've had to pull it up almost. I think, and then also getting controls in your working view to show when you have missing information. You can put a conditional statement on it to color code it. Like if we have an indirect waste, then I better have an indirect waste number that indirect waste goes to. So I'll highlight that cell if it doesn't have an indirect waste number placed in it. So there's just things you can do to set yourself up. Hey, if you want to vote for that, I've got that as a class for AU that I'm hoping to do. Go search for Danya on the class list and vote for my schedule list.
Yeah, I think I've got
There's more,
classes. Bob's got, Bob, you've got a couple classes, right?
Yep.
As well.
I do.
So I know if you search for MKF, you can find my classes to vote for them. If you search
Yes.
Danya, you can find Danya's classes. Bob,
Yes.
what did you put in for a search term?
You didn't tell me about that. I have to put mine in.
Oh, well,
Secret.
well,
You can share.
Bob, look us up on social media. I think we've all linked to each other's classes coming up.
We're on LinkedIn.
I'll be
or
submitting
LinkedIn.
before Friday.
Oh, so we'll have to. We'll search for John's too. One other thing I will say to piggyback on Donnie is you can have more than one working schedule for the same thing.
Yes.
So, for example, we have a couple of working door schedules. One of just find everything that's a door, and then one that is a sort the same way as our door schedule, and like looks at our normal door schedule stuff. But it, like to find the like, why can't I find this door? Just be able to find it in the schedule is really helpful. We do the same thing for some other parameters where we've got like 3 schedules depending on what you want to edit. That's a yes, no, that there's a bunch of.
Yes.
You can hop into that and tick that box. It'll make the pretty little X in the live schedule without having to turn on and off hidden views. If you've got hidden views in a schedule or hidden columns, make a copy of that with them unhidden.
Yes.
Oh,
what about lost rooms?
Oh yeah, that's you got to have a working room schedule of everything.
Yeah, we use space schedules extensively to find redundant rooms, not place rooms or spaces.
Mhm.
Make sure naming convention matches across architectural and mechanical.
And all of our working schedule, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, but we also use a lot of design assist schedules. So we'll have equipment schedules or air terminal schedules, embedded air terminal schedules and space schedules. I mean, there's a huge host of things that you can do. And yes, the working and publish versions, invaluable.
And I've got several things on, if you look up Autodesk Community Conversations and also Autodesk Community Voices, I've got a couple blog things on schedules there.
We are coming up on the top of the hour. Do we want to take 1 or 2 more from the last session?
Is
Justin,
it going to cut us off?
I don't know.
Oh, no, working on time. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time here. So, we don't want to go too, as long as you guys are all in agreement for continuing, then go for it.
I have to actually jump off. I got a luncheon to go to, so you guys have to finish without me.
Well, let's throw like 1 or 2 more MEP ones at John.
Yes.
I'm a plumbing designer and we currently use an Excel file for pressure calculations. We input the available pressure at the building and then subtract the pressure losses through equipment, which can come from Revit families, and then take the total length of the system, longest run, to calculate the available pressure for sizing. Is there anything in Revit that can be used to run this calculation?
Yes. There's a pressure loss calculation and report inside Revit, and it does a pretty good job. The only caveat is all of your fittings need to have that coefficient assigned. If it's not, it's going to bomb out. So I would verify that every single fitting you have in your project has that coefficient assigned. That was easy.
Yeah. Does anybody, or if anybody's looking at the list, I've got like 5 more here. We can hold on to a couple for the next time we do this. But how to show breaks for crossing different elevations, the mechanical settings. Draw MEP hidden lines as set, but doesn't show any breaks. I'm not quite sure what that one means.
The draw MEP hidden lines, that I'm guessing that the line style is, or the line pattern, probably the dashes are a bit too big in the line style.
Yeah.
So they don't properly show up.
to expanding on that, Revit doesn't do dashes like CAD does, where it'll like let the pattern end weird. There's a minimum length. So if you have, say, a pattern that is 2 inches long, or if you have a pattern that is like 1 inch of line, 1 inch of dash, and you draw a line that is 1.5 inches, you will get a solid line. If you draw a line that is 2 inches, you will get a solid line. If you draw a line that's 2.5 inches, that's where Revit will start to give you the break in the middle there. So that's a really good catch. That I'll bet the break is too short.
Or too
for that
big,
line,
yeah.
or yeah, too long. The totality of the line pattern, because if
Right.
particularly if it's like a dash dot dash or something, or double dash or what have you, I'll bet that's what that is.
I think
Well-
the next one, I'm a little stumped by the not being able to show the metal deck profile in a roof. I think, yeah.
I think that has to do with, okay.
Well, let me read that one. Besides modeling the roof as a floor to show the metal deck profile, is there another way to model the roof as a roof and show the metal deck profile in sections besides using a detail component?
No, I mean, even in a floor, you can't see the profile that way.
Yeah, because it's a layer.
Yeah.
You do a repeating detail,
Yeah.
but that's,
Mhm.
yeah, that's it. So yeah, they figured that one out.
Yeah, and the other disadvantage / advantage of modeling the roof as a floor is there are some sub tools that you can get in floors that you can't get in roofs, and vice versa. I've found that more commonly metal corrugated metal decking wants to be a floor more than a roof, even though we're using it as a roof. Like the general behavior tends to be more like a floor. So sometimes when we're in Revit, you like it's a window. Well, no, it's not a window. It's actually a curtain wall. Or there's what Revit calls something is not necessarily what it really is in the real world of architecture, and you gotta kind of think about what Revit wants it to be as opposed to what it actually is.
Yeah, one negative of modeling things in proper categories is if you are using third-party tools to do any type of energy analysis, that's where you start to face a lot of errors. We've had a number of teams that will model a floor where there's a roof, and then the energy analysis is all off because it's looking for a roof and it's actually a floor. So yeah, there's still a lot of bridging to do between Revit and the real world scenarios of a lot of these items and categories.
So we are 5 minutes over. We've got 4 questions hauled over from the last time. We can hang on to those, I think, for the next time.
Sure.
Unless anybody's got one last question to toss out live, we'll call it there. We've been dropping in numbers, so I think we can call it there. Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for attending. Look us all up on LinkedIn. We've all got recent posts, I think, for our classes. Vicki, do you have any classes this year for AU?
Not yet. I do not plan on submitting anything on my own. I have a conference presentation burnout, but I think I have a coworker who wants to try to co-present something. So, but it will go in her name, not my name.
Well, thanks everyone, and look forward to the next time, and we'll talk with you all soon.
All right.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.